So today I'm finishing with my series called the 12 Steps of Transformation, which I've been basing on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as I said from the very beginning of the series, I believe the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are powerful tools to help us to awaken to our true nature, our divinity, the life of God within us. And not only that, but they help us, give us some tools to live that truth. Day by day, one day at a time. To live from that centered place. And to do and say and act in ways that represent that truth for us. I believe that the 12 steps embody what I believe is important in any spiritual path. And three things in particular is that it's about conscious contact with a higher power, conscious contact with God within us, however we understand God. It's about honest self-connection, awareness of myself, what's going on within me, what's alive in me, where am I in my own journey. It also gives us tools for compassionate connection with other people. How do we make amends? How do we speak to other people about what we have discovered about ourselves? And it also inspires us to give back, to give from our spiritual awakening, to share with the world, to really be in the world, and to give from our own place of awakening. And so today I'm finishing this series with the 12th step, which says, having had a spiritual awakening, as a result of these steps, we try to carry our message to alcoholics and to live these principles in every aspect of our lives. So having had a spiritual awakening, we strive to take that into our daily lives, to live that spiritual awakening in our lives. How do we do that? What does that mean for us? What do we even mean by a spiritual awakening? And the idea that came to me this week about a very simple understanding of that for me is that spiritual awakening is making the truth of our spiritual nature conscious. That we awaken to the truth of our divine essence. Why do we even need to awaken? Are we asleep? Yeah. In many ways, we have fallen asleep to our truth, to our divine essence. I said before, we are spiritual beings. We are expressions, emanations, children, however you want to understand that, but we are the divine life energy, God in itself, that is expressing in this dimension, in and through our humanity. And we came into this life experience, I said a couple of weeks ago, it's like a cosmic joke. We are these divine beings and we get plopped down in here into all this stuff. This consciousness, this collective consciousness. And then we sort of get, it's kind of like, we just kind of get plopped into it and it begins to somehow take us over. And we begin to understand ourselves not as these divine beings, but as these beings, these human beings, or these expressions that somehow get defined by the world. We define ourselves by our gender and our race and our nationality and our religion and our sexuality and all the ways that the world wants to label us, wants to define us. And the problem with that is that when we begin to think that's who we are in our own minds, our own consciousness, we separate ourselves from who we truly are. I want to be clear that we can never be separate from who we truly are, but we believe we are. We fall asleep to our divine nature. And then we act in ways that are not in harmony or in alignment with who we know we truly are. So when we believe that, when I believe that I am that thing that the world wants me to be, then I have this whole makeup of what that means. If I say that, if I define myself, and I'm not saying I'm not, but, if I define myself as Christian, then somehow that separates me from someone who defines him or herself as Jewish or Muslim. If I say that I am American, then it separates me from somebody who's not. And I said this before, it's like, the way I see it is that it's I separate myself. Not that I'm at fault, not that I do it consciously, not that any of us does it consciously, but it's just what happens unconsciously, subconsciously. That's why it's important for us to be aware that we're doing it. We can get entranced, fall asleep, and not aware that that's what's happening. Especially if it's at a very subtle level. And I think that's where our isms arise. I've said this before. Our isms, ISM. I separate myself. According to my race, my nationality, my religion, my gender, my sexual orientation. And those isms can become schisms. And so it's important that we awaken to that. And I think, first of all, it requires us to, I think what the Course in Miracles calls awakening within the dream. Sort of being aware, first of all, that that's happening. That I'm aware that something is happening there that's not really in alignment with my truth. And so I'm sort of aware of it. I'm awakening to the fact that it's happening. So I'm awakening within the context of that self to some awareness of that. But how do I awaken from the dream? I think that's where I am in my own path, too. What is the difference? How can I be awakening up in some way within the dream of separation and then completely awaken? For me, it hasn't happened instantaneously. I think those awakenings happen gradually and incrementally and sometimes instantaneously. We awaken to a new awareness, a new understanding of who we truly are. I think the idea is to allow who we truly are to be the awakened presence that lives through us in the world. and responds as us to the world. There's a difference, I think. And I can't stand here today and tell you that I have the answer. I wish I did. I'd probably write a book about it, but I don't. I think it's a process, and I think what's important to me about that process today is the awareness. Willing to be aware of what's going on. And my willingness to come to terms with it, to look at it, to face it, to really look for myself. What are my isms? And to be honest with myself about that. Connecting with God, connecting with the source, as the 12 steps teach us, connecting with a higher power, surrendering to a higher power, is a big part of this process. But really being honest with myself about where I'm separating myself from that truth, and being willing to do something about it is key. Because I think, ideally, it is from that awakened place of knowing our truth that we can best respond to the world. That we can best respond to what we see happening in the world. The fear and the discord, the separation that seems to be happening, fear and violence. I want to share with you a story today from a scripture that I'm guessing that most of us are familiar with. It is from Luke. You know it as the parable of the Good Samaritan. Just to refresh your memory, this is from Luke 10. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." He said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And Jesus said, Jesus was kind of tricky sometimes. He didn't give you a direct answer. He kind of told you a story, make it a little more confusing. Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Now, I think we can look at that story, and many of us have read that story many times or heard that story many times. And so we think, well, Jesus was just saying to him that everyone is your neighbor, and you should take care of everyone who you find on your path who needs your help. And that's often the story, that's often the interpretation that we hear. And I will say, many of you probably know this, but in historical context, that Samaritans were not accepted by the Jews. They were sort of half-breed. They were Assyrians and Hebrew. And so the Jews did not accept them. They were sort of a second-class people, and they didn't associate with them. And so the idea that one who was an outcast or not accepted by the Jewish people would be the one to offer the help was part of the lesson. And I think that's an important piece of the lesson. But what we know about Jesus is that, as I said, he didn't always give direct answers. He taught in parables. A parable is a story that has a deeper meaning. And for us in Unity, we read these stories, we look at stories historically, we look at stories metaphysically, we interpret these stories maieutically, which really means, what does it mean to me? How is it unfolding in my life? And what I found really fascinating about this, as I explored this more from a metaphysical perspective, and I will remind those of you I will tell those of you who are new to Unity, may not be aware that Charles Fillmore, one of the co-founders of Unity, created a metaphysical Bible dictionary, which has meanings for every person, every place, deeper meanings. These stories tell not so much only about what's going on in the world or a lesson, but what's going on within us. What's happening in our own consciousness. And that every character, every place has a meaning for us. So what does this story tell me about me? What's going on in my own life, in my own thinking, in my own conscious awareness? And what do I do about it? And so, Jesus was specific in the story. A man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho. And metaphysically, that really represents exactly what I was talking about earlier. Going from the consciousness of spirit, of knowing, of unity and oneness, and traveling that road where we're focused more on the world, our separation, our isms, our ways of identifying ourselves. And what I notice for me is that when I focus on that, I can end up on the side of the road, beaten and battered. Not by someone else, but by my own way of thinking. My own judgments about other people. My own judgments about myself. It's not about someone else doing it to me. But I can end up that way. So I am the one who is making that trip. I am the one on the road. I am the one who can rob himself of that life energy. Beat myself down. Does anybody relate to that at all? Beat yourself down with your own self-criticism or criticism of other people, robbing you of your life energy. But all the other characters in the story are us as well. Well, let me say, I'll claim it for me. The priest who ignores. Man, I'll tell you what, sometimes, I was going to say, boy, let me tell you what. Sometimes I can get so much into that, I'm just so spiritual. I'm too spiritual to think about that stuff. Anybody relate to that? I am just above all of it. I don't need to pay attention to that stuff. Even though it's going on in my own head, in my own mind, that aspect of me that doesn't want to give that any energy, just walk on by. I'm above it. And then the Levite, oh boy, another one. And this, I think, this is sort of that, you probably heard about people, you've had this idea of spiritualizing the ego. Spiritualizing the ego. It's this idea that I think is pretty rampant in unity. Did I just say that? That idea of, oh, well, I say that, but I'll just pray and meditate, and I'll do my affirmations and denials, and it'll all go away, right? I don't need to give it any real energy. I can just kind of, oh, it's over there, but I'll just spiritualize it, and it won't matter, right? Anybody relate? So I can relate to that. There's also that piece of us that I think represents that knower, that connection, that Christ self, that is always aware of and connected to that place of awakening, represented by the Good Samaritan that says, goes to that place. You know, the other two just walk on by, but the Samaritan goes to wherever that is and says, I'm here to help. I'm here to lift you up. You know, and metaphysically, the wine and the oil represent life and love. And so that aspect of us that gives to us in our place of fear and separation and isms, to pour that life and love of truth to raise us up. There is that aspect of us as well. It cares for us, lifts us up, and helps to restore us to that place of knowing. And I think it is in that place, the place of restoration, revival, renewal, is that place of deep connection with God, life, love. And the reason I think that is so important for me, and just to invite you into the question, where am I coming from? Which one of those aspects am I really paying attention to? And I'm saying that it's not one or the other. They're all there. Which one am I really following? Which one am I choosing to be aligned with? Moment by moment. You know, the 12 steps talk about one day at a time. Well, to me, it's one moment at a time to make that choice. Am I just so spiritual that none of that matters? Am I so in love with this idea that I can somehow pray it away or affirm it away? Or am I really willing to be honest with myself and to lift that up in my consciousness and restore myself to that place of sanity? Surrendering to that place within me. And it's important for me to know that, to be self-aware, and to know that I can make a conscious choice about that. Because I think it is from the place of renewal, restoration, the place of union and oneness, that we can really serve the world. What I believe is that we can't raise someone else. We can't help someone else raise their consciousness beyond a level of consciousness that we have attained. And so if we're coming from fear and separation, those isms, fear, and then going out to serve the world, and what are we adding? What are we doing? Like a friend and I were talking about mountain climbing. You know, it's like you climb up the mountain and you get a little higher, then you can reach back and help someone else come up the mountain. But you can't help someone else any farther than you have already climbed. And so it's important for us, speaking of schisms, help each other over. Help each other over into a new consciousness, to a new way of understanding ourselves. Because in that place, none of that matters. Place of union, place of knowing, place of oneness. We are the same. We are that life of God expressing. We are already it. We just have to wake up to it and choose to live it.